In the late 1980s, the world was in a state of panic after scientists discovered this: a giant hole in the ozone, the important layer that protects us from the sun's ultraviolet rays.
Every October, a hole appears in the ozone layer over the South Pole. And what worries scientists most is
they're still not exactly sure what causes the hole.
This is one of the most critical environmental problems the entire planet faces.
We were dealing with a problem that had the potential for major adverse consequences, not just for the United States, but for the entire planet.
Following this world-threatening discovery in 1985, all of the world's nations recognized the severity of the problem and came together to form a solution: the Montreal Protocol. The discovery of the ozone hole and the subsequent Montreal Protocol represents a turning point in history because it was a display of complete international cooperation that had never been seen before in response to a global crisis. Not only did the Montreal Protocol prevent the world from disaster, it showed that science and politics could work together. This is the story of how such a feat was achieved and the impact it has had and continues to have on the entire world. In the late 1800s, many people stored their food in an early precursor to refrigerators called iceboxes, like these. In 1918, William C. Durant introduced the first home refrigerator with a compressor. Now, instead of being cooled by ice, refrigerators were cooled through gaseous substances called refrigerants. Such substances included ammonia, methyl chloride, and sulfur dioxide. However, after a series of deaths in the 1920s due to leakages of methyl chloride, companies started searching for a safer refrigerant. In 1930, American chemical engineer Thomas Misley Jr. published a paper announcing the discovery of a new class of refrigerating agents, organic substances containing fluorine, or what we now call them, CFCs. In that same year, General Motors, the company Thomas worked for, and DuPont, a chemicals company, formed the Kinetic Chemical Company specifically to produce CFCs, or as DuPont called it, Freon. Because of its non-toxicity, Freon became extremely popular. Throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Freon was utilized for applications like the first air conditioning systems and propellants in bug spray, spray paint, and even foodstuffs. By the mid-1970s, Freon production had reached over 1 million tons worldwide, and it had no sign of slowing down. However, in 1974, chemists Mario Molina and F.S. Rowland published an unexpected paper, stating CFCs could remain in the atmosphere for up to 150 years and potentially destroy the ozone layer. What no one knew at the time was that this paper would foreshadow the catastrophic effects of what was to come. In 1985, 3 researchers from the British Antarctic Survey team reported a shocking discovery. One of the researchers, Jonathan Shanklin, was tasked with checking, correcting, and uploading ozone data to a digital system, which was previously being recorded by hand. When BAS held an open day at their Cambridge headquarters, there was commotion regarding the effect of CFCs on the ozone. After Shanklin overheard, he decided to plot the yearly average ozone values from 1957 to 1984 and compare them.
And ozone values are getting lower and lower.
Shanklin found that ozone levels were dropping at dramatic rates. He quickly brought his findings to his superiors, Farman and Gardner, who were as shocked as he was. On May 16, 1985, the 3 published their findings to the world, and the news, as well as the panic, spread quickly. The world was now facing an imminent threat.
Scientists recently found a hole in the ozone shield over the South Pole that was larger than the United States.
recently scientists discovered a weak spot in the ozone layer over Antarctica.
Satellite observations have confirmed a progressive deterioration in the Earth's protective ozone layer above Antarctica.
The ozone loss was so severe that multiple reports in the late 80s predicted that the rates of skin cancer would skyrocket because of the increased UV radiation that would pass through the atmosphere. Scientists were also concerned the ozone hole would disrupt marine ecosystems by killing off phytoplankton, the base of the food chain. In 1986 and 87, a team of researchers led by this woman, Susan Solomon, traveled to Antarctica to take measurements of the ozone. They discovered that where ozone levels were low, chlorine levels spiked. It was direct confirmation that the hole in our ozone was caused by man-made CFCs. It immediately became clear that this was not just an environmental issue, but a global crisis that could destroy ecosystems and life as we know it. It would require the cooperation of the entire world to resolve it. Being the leading producer of CFCs, the United States quickly worked with other nations to establish an international ozone agreement. However, some members of the Reagan administration opposed an agreement, arguing the scientific evidence was not substantial and that CFC controls would possibly damage the economy. In late May of 1987, Donald Hodel proposed a personal protection plan, which involved wearing hats and sunglasses as an alternative to government regulation of CFCs. Despite his efforts, Hodel was lampooned by cartoonists and members of the public, who sent letters to newspapers criticizing his plan. Ultimately, President Reagan overruled Hodel and other opponents, solidifying the United States plan to work with the rest of the world on an agreement. After a number of conferences hosted by the United Nations Environment Program, over 30 countries met in Montreal on September 16, 1987, to finalize their solution, the Montreal Protocol.
The Montreal Protocol is a landmark document and achievement by any standard. The Montreal Protocol improves the odds in the risky game the world has been playing with its own future.
The Montreal Protocol detailed a series of 11 control measures to methodically phase out the use of CFCs over the next 2 decades. 26 countries signed the protocol, marking a significant turning point in the global fight against the ozone hole. Each country knew what was at stake and was willing to act. However, in order for the protocol to enter into force, it required 11 countries, representing 2/3 of consumption of CFCs, to ratify it. President Reagan knew the US would play a leading role in the implementation of the protocol. Both he and Lee Thomas, the administrator of the US Environmental Protection Agency, urged the Senate to ratify the protocol to inspire other nations to do the same.
The United States should ratify this agreement. We should ratify it as soon as possible, and we should press the rest of the world to do the same.
Thus, it is the United States that holds the ultimate key to the success of the Montreal Protocol.
Finally, on March 14, 1988, the Senate approves ratification of the protocol. The vote was unanimous, 83-0. By the end of 1988, over 30 nations followed suit and ratified the protocol. It became clear the Montreal Protocol was not just a response to an environmental issue. It was a turning point in international diplomacy, an example that all the world's countries could work together. Now, it was up to the chemical companies and consumers. All eyes turned to CFC's largest producer, DuPont. On March 4, 1988, DuPont Chair Richard E. Herkert wrote a letter to the Senate denying the need to cut down on CFCs. It seemed like DuPont was not willing to give up their prized chemical.
And until we had the science, we were not in a position to make a very intelligent business decision.
Fortunately, that science came 20 days later. In light of new information from NASA, DuPont announced they would comply with the protocol and stop the production of CFCs. DuPont's actions also marked a turning point from an industry standpoint, because it showed that even the companies themselves could take steps to protect the world. Because DuPont had been the main source of CFCs, they inspired other major companies around the world to cut down their CFC use, companies like Boeing, Ford Motor Company, and many more. Despite the significant progress, some scientists doubted the protocol would be effective and that the damage was irreversible. But the cooperation and international response continued to grow. By the end of 1990, over 70 countries had ratified the protocol. Over the next 2 decades, the Montreal Protocol started an international social movement, garnering attention from celebrities and TV shows.
We can destroy the ozone layer.
The ozone layer must be protected.
Our top story, the ozone hole.
The attention caused the United Nations to add amendments to the protocol, serving to accelerate the phase-out of even more ozone-depleting chemicals. By 2010, the percentage of CFC emissions had dropped by almost 99%, and now the ozone hole is on track to fully heal. The Montreal Protocol has also served as a model for many multilateral agreements, such as the Kyoto Protocol, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and most recently, the Paris Agreement, an international treaty to fight climate change, one of the biggest environmental issues facing our planet today.
Paris was a turning point in the fight against climate change.
What's very interesting is they've adopted some of the features of the Montreal Protocol.
We've done it once. We can do it again.
The Montreal Protocol, being the only universally ratified treaty in history, represents a turning point not only in environmental history, but also in international cooperation. Its success has played an integral role in the survival of our planet, and who knows what the world may have looked like without it.